Hi there. I'm out in the woods this morning, taking a walk where I like to be, and also hoping to get some wildlife photos, mostly some deer. That's the most common thing around here. Um, but one thing about wildlife photos, when you get them, you want to have what's called shallow depth of field. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, what that depth of field means is it's just the range of focus in a photograph. That's the kind of simplest definitions I would tell my students, is that it's the range of focus in a photograph. And then with wildlife, normally you want that range of focus to be very minimal so that you focus on the animal and not the background. And there's a number of ways you can achieve shallow depth of field. One is by a telephoto lens. The longer your lens, the less depth of field you get in a photograph. And the wide angle lens is going to get more depth of field. And another way you can control your depth of field is by the setting of your aperture. Now, the aperture controls how much light comes into your camera through an opening in your lens. And normally you want that opening wide open, or as wide as your lens will allow it. Some lenses will allow it to be to a number that's called 2.8 or 4 or 5.6. So here's a photograph I'm going to put up. I'm going to put a couple photographs up here and you can see what I'm talking about. This is an elk. It was shot at 300 millimeter lens, which is telephoto lens, at 5.6. It's got good enough depth of field to get the whole elk in focus, but yet that background mountain is completely blurred out. And which also is another thing that affects depth of field, is how far away the background is. And in this photograph, you can see the background's very far away, so it's not in focus. And this second photograph of an elk is taken actually with a 420 millimeter focal length, and at 5.6 as well, but it has even less depth of field because it's closer up, which is another thing that affects depth of field, is how close you are to something. And that telephoto lens takes us right in on its face for a nice portrait of this elk. And the background is really blurred out, you know, with a combination of that 420 millimeter focal length, the 5.6 lens opening, and as well as how close the elk is to the camera. Now here's another photograph that's even closer to the animal, this whooping crane. And as you can see from the whooping crane, that background is completely gone, right? You can't even tell what it is. You can just see it's green, which is good. You don't want a city building back there, even though it's out of focus, but we got natural stuff for the whooping crane. And that is also taken with a 420 millimeter focal length at 5.6. So that completely makes the background go blurry. Now in this photograph, we have a cheetah, and it's only taken with a 200 millimeter lens, which is also a telephoto, but not as long as a 420 millimeter focal length or a 300 millimeter focal length. This is only a 200 millimeter focal length, and you can see its background's blurred, but that's because it's at 2.8, and 2.8 is a very wide open aperture. Some lenses don't even go that wide, but some of the more expensive lenses will go to a 2.8 aperture, and you can see that completely knocks out the background, because all we need in focus is that cheetah. So you can see what's going on with that photograph. And here's another one of sandhill cranes in a field, and this one's taken at 5.8. The reason for that is because we have two cranes in the photo, so I wanted to make sure I was getting them both in focus. So I stopped down the aperture. I made it smaller, which gives me more focus, and I made it to f8 just to get a little bit better focus to get both cranes in the picture. Now in focus. Now this photograph, also of sandhill cranes in flight, is f10. This is taken with a 420 millimeter focal length as well, but the f10 is going to give it a little bit more depth of field, plus the birds are a little farther away than some of the other photographs I showed you. So I get a little bit more depth of field, making sure the majority of those cranes, even though they're silhouetted, are still sharp. Their silhouettes are sharp against the sky. So I'm going to move on to macro photography of a photograph of a spider. You remember I said getting close also affects the range of focus in your photograph. It limits the depth of field, and you can see with this spider that it's even though this is at f13 with the aperture and it's only a 100mm lens, but it's really close up to the spider, so there's not much in focus in this picture. So macro photography really limits the depth of field in a photograph, and you can see that also in this photo of a butterfly. The depth of field is really, really shallow. That background is out of focus. The depth of field setting also goes beyond wildlife photography, because with portraits of people, you also want to have shallow depth of field. Now, there was a time in my life where I did a lot of real estate photography for homes going up for sale, and often when I go in those homes, people would have like family portraits or senior portraits on a coffee table or on an end table or something like that, or on the wall, and I would take note. And some of those photographs weren't done very well because the background was in focus, and people still bought the pictures because they didn't know any better, or maybe they just had their aunt or uncle take the pictures instead of a pro photographer. But what you really want to do is have that background blurred out, such as in this photograph of a family photographed on a pathway. This is only 4.0. Now, it's not 2.8, although that lens could have done that. It's 4.0 with the aperture, so it's pretty wide open, but it's not as wide open as it could be because I wanted to make sure I got the whole family in focus. But it is critical to keep, when you're using those shallow depth of fields, to keep everybody on the same plane as much as possible. So all four of these people in the family are about the equal distance away from the camera, and you can see how blurred out that background is, and it's not distracting to the photograph. Also, you'll notice in this photograph, the family's not right next to the background. That was another thing I noticed in the portraits that were on the walls in people's homes. Often people were right up against the background, and that keeps the background in focus as well. So you want to move them away from the background when you're doing a portrait. And you can see that also in this mother-daughter portrait, also shot with that same 200mm lens, and it's shot at 4.0. Again, not 2.8, although the lens could do that, but I wanted to make sure I got both people in focus. But you can see that background is very blurred, very soft, and the people stand out. And this goes beyond portrait photography. Sports photography is also done in the same way, with shallow depth of field, as you can see with this baseball pitcher. The pitcher stands out off the background because a wide open aperture is being used, which also for sports gives an added benefit, because a wide open aperture allows you to use a faster shutter speed. And maybe that'll be another video. What's the relationship between shutter speed and aperture? I'll do that in another one. In this next photograph, it's somebody rappelling down a rock, and he's got someone belaying him from the top. And when I shot this is taken with a 200mm lens, but I left the aperture more stopped down. It was set at 6.3, and the reason for that is that because I wanted to make sure I got both people in focus. I didn't want just one of them in focus, one of out of focus, and then it also keeps the rock in focus a little bit. But because the background way back of the valley below is a distance away, it's out of focus. And one last thing I want to talk about too, this shallow depth of field can also work for like vegetation, flowers. Here's a blossom on a tree that really stands out from the other blossoms. This is also taken with that same 200mm lens, but its aperture is 4.5, and of course we're closer up to the flower as well, which softens up the background. let's go ahead and recap. And remember hopefully I get them all because I'm doing this off the top of my head. So I got to remember. My memory sometimes isn't that great. You can see the gray in the bear, getting a little old. But to recap, the best way to make your depth of field more shallow is by having a wide open aperture. And that could be like 2.8 or 4 or 5.6, a setting like that. And it's going to depend on your lens. The more expensive lenses could get down to 2.8 or 4, and the less expensive lenses, it's probably 5.6. And as you zoom out on those, sometimes, they may start at 4, but when they zoom out, they get to 5.6. Any event, keep it as wide as your lens will let you do it. Also, the distance to your subject, close up on a subject, makes less depth of field. A telephoto lens makes less depth of field, so 200, 300, or 400 millimeter lenses are going to have less depth of field. And also the distance from the background, so the farther away from the background a subject is, the more likely that background is to fall out of focus. So there's a little recap. If I forgot one, sorry. Watch the whole video, you'll see it there. And also, one thing, just to put a little spiritual note in, we want to get shallow depth of field in our life when it comes to our focus. Our focus needs to be on God. We need to let everything in the background go blurry so we can see God better. So let the background of your life go blurry and focus on God and the things of God. So that's it. God bless you. And you want more information, visit my website, thecreationspeaks.com. thecreationspeaks.com. You can see I got a blog there about faith and photography, as well as I do something called the visual Bible verse of the day. So God bless you, and may you draw near to him.